Hi, I'm Owen, the host of the Australian Finance Podcast. This podcast is proudly sponsored by BetaShares, one of the leading providers of ETFs here in Australia. Serving thousands of financial advisors and over 1 million investors, BetaShares manages tens of billions of dollars on behalf of investors right across the country. I'm proud to partner with BetaShares on the Australian Finance Podcast, Australia's premier financial podcast, because there is great alignment in the long-term philosophy shared by both businesses. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast.
Okay, so today I'm joined by Lacy Filipich. Did I say it right?
You did.
We were just
Well
practicing.
done.
Okay, amazing. Lacy, not only are you an icon in the finance education world, mainly because of your no-nonsense approach to money, which I absolutely love, you're the founder of MoneySchool. You're now the head of financial wellness at Maslow.
Correct.
You're an award-winning author. You're a speaker. You've done an amazing TED Talk, but you're also a chemical engineer.
Yes, I am,
which is
throws people.
crazy. Yes, amazing. So you've been on the show before, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with you. But yeah, tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to this wonderful world of financial education.
Yeah, most people wonder what brings a chemical engineer into financial education. There are actually a lot of engineers in the financial independence world, surprisingly.
I have noticed that as well.
Yeah.
Yes, I really have. So yeah, tell us how you led there, and then maybe we can connect the dots with the others.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason there's so many engineers is because we're obsessed with reducing waste. That's pretty much what engineers do. We reduce wasted products or things that get ruined through our processes, wasted time. So for me, like once I got my head around the point of money, which is to buy back your time, I kind of understood why there's so many engineers, because they're like, yeah, why would I waste the time I spend working? That's my hypothesis anyway. But in my personal circumstance, it was that I had kind of, I'm going to call it a quarter life crisis at 26, like I'm claiming a quarter at that point, but
Yeah.
I had a series of things go wrong in my life. I had a major health issue. I burned out and I was bedridden for 5 weeks. And that was like my first experience of, oh my gosh, I'm not immortal.
Yes.
So that really sucked. And then very sadly, my sister took her own life and she was only 24. And although that was a choice, it did bring home that idea of life's really short. We've got to make the most of it. And then I got what was supposed to be something amazing, a promotion, which just turned out the further you go up the ladder, the more meat in the sandwich you are. I thought I was going to get more autonomy and I didn't.
Yeah.
And all those things caused me to question what I thought was my life's path. Which was I was going to be CEO of BHP Billiton. It was Billiton back then. Now it's just BHP. I was sure that was going to be what I wanted to do. And I just had a moment of like, wow, no.
What am I doing?
No, not for me. And so took what it turned out later to be termed a mini retirement. Some people call them a sabbatical, but basically took 3 months off. Mm-hmm. And reset, went traveling with my then partner, now husband. And during that time started thinking about, the point of life is actually to have time to do what we want. And so that's where I started thinking about becoming time rich more so than money rich. But the advantage that I had was my mum had taught me about money, and I had started saving when I was 10, half of every dollar I've ever earned. I still do it. And started investing when I was 19. So I was actually well on my way to financial independence by the time I had that crisis. Lucky me, because that's what allowed me to have that break. But while I was having the break, my friends were going, how come you can take so much time off work? This is not fair. Like if I did that, I'd be homeless. And I was like, what? Hold on. What do you mean? And they're like, well, we've been getting credit cards and car loans and I don't have savings. I was like, did your parents never talk to you about money? And that was when I first realized.
There was your light bulb moment.
Exactly. And I was just, as I say, I won the ovarian lottery in the very literal specific sense of getting my mother, who was an accountant, who taught me about money and built that curiosity and excitement in me, and I'm kind of like what happens when you teach kids about money. I'm like the logical outcome. And learning from her, especially considering like she was a single mum at the time. She didn't actually start saving and investing until she was 49. So I got to see it all as a teenager.
Yeah, and she's made sure you're benefited from that from day one.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so we kind of started investing at the same time. I was like 19, she's 47. I think we're 2 years.
That's a great bonding experience too. Yeah. Like that's something great to do. I love though that you've used it, like you've always, from your story, you've used money as an empowering tool, whereas it could go the other way. Like if you had been saving and investing so long, you could have easily had that a different mindset that tied you to that job and that earning capacity and not being able to step away from that.
Exactly. And, I had never heard of the Financial Independence Retire Early movement, FIRE, or anything that's a derivation of that. There's lots of different versions of that acronym. I actually didn't know about that as a movement until well after I'd gotten there.
You're like, I'm doing it.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that's what this is called.
Yeah.
I had just, thought about that whole saving thing. I wanted my money to work for me. That's what my mum had taught me. And so it was just about not wasting. And because I'm pretty low maintenance, I didn't have to buy much stuff. And I chose a lucrative career, and all the things that went in my favor, the timing wise, the family situations, meeting a partner who we have very similar values with and we've stayed together, all those sorts of things. I've had a lot of things that have made it easier for me than for other people. But still, it was that basic knowledge.
It was that foundation.
Yeah. And that's what's been lacking, unfortunately, for a lot of people.
And so that would have been where MoneySchool comes from.
Yeah, exactly. So started the business intending to teach parents how to teach their kids about money 15 years ago. I wanted them to learn, I wanted kids to learn the way that my mum taught me, incidentally, in lots of little conversations, practical skills. And most parents were like, oh, I don't know what to do. So that's where it started. And then all of a sudden I got a lot of adults going, yeah, that's lovely, but I don't have kids. Can you just teach me?
Yeah.
And so MoneySchool is mostly now about teaching grown-ups about money, but that still flows down into parents, and I still try and help parents because I think that's where you can have this impact. As I say, I'm what happens when you teach a kid from a young age. So you may as well try.
Yeah, and the parents need to know, I always say, you've got to put your own oxygen mask on first. So often I'll hear people say, I want to save or invest for my children. And I'm like, that is great, but you need to have your money sorted first. Need to have your own oxygen mask on first before you can help others. So get that sorted, model great behaviors around it, and you're doing so much for them already rather than having, a big pool of money that you can gift them. There's things that you can do day to day that's going to have a bigger impact on their financial lives that doesn't cost you a cent. So that's your amazing story. But the purpose of today's episode, so you're on the Australian Finance Podcast. We've had you on a couple of times, but today we're talking about International Women's Day. So this is a day that falls on March 8th every year, and it's been around for a very long time. It's a day that celebrates women, promotes gender equality, and it happens worldwide so that we can really recognize the achievements of women in all areas, home, sport, work, all the different things that we do, but also raise awareness of the challenges that we still face. So I thought it would be great to get you on. You're such an advocate for financial literacy and, all these things that impact not just women. But I thought it'd be great to get your view on how this kind of what this day means and why we still need it and all of those kind of things. So do you want to start with telling us what is International Women's Day in your eyes?
Well, I actually was thinking back to when I first started thinking about International Women's Day. I must have gone to one of the first International Women's Day breakfasts because it's 30 years old. And when I was in year 7, my year 7 teacher took me to a Zonta breakfast. And it was the first place that I learned that women hadn't always been allowed to vote.
Yeah.
That men had always been allowed to vote, but women actually had to fight for the right to vote. And I was,
you were like, what?
Going excuse me? What? And then I learned about suffragettes and all the struggles they had to go through. There were women who got locked in jail for weeks and force-fed because they refused to eat in protest to try and get the vote. It was not easy for them. That fight, just to get something that we take for granted now, is what we're recognizing. There's a lot of struggle.
Yeah.
And, there's been lots of things that you look back on now and you can't believe. It was only in the 1970s that a woman could get a loan without a man on it, in Australia.
And a credit card. And it wasn't that long ago. Yeah, bank accounts and business loans. It's crazy when you think about the year that we're in and a lot has changed. And it's quite recent.
Yeah, it's a surprise, right? And I think that's why often, and particularly I'll talk to men who are like, but I don't get it. We've got equal pay. I know lots of women who are working and lots of dads who do the school pickup. Aren't we done yet? And I think I can really understand that point of view because when you look back on those things, you go, wow, we have come a long way. But there's so much stuff that is still maybe not overcome yet, still quite entrenched. Because that's a cultural thing, right? Any culture that thought a woman shouldn't be allowed to vote has got a history there, there's some cultural stuff that said a woman's not her own person, she's a possession, things that don't match with today. But there are still people alive who had those cultures who there are women alive who couldn't get their own bank account in their 20s,
Yeah.
This is it's still in our lived memory.
And it's crazy when we've changed. Sorry, it's crazy now that we've changed. We look back and go, oh, that's crazy. But there's still things that happen today that I'm sure in 20 years we'll go, that's crazy that we thought that that was normal and didn't question it.
Exactly. And that's what I think is a message. When you look at, every year we're getting better at collecting data and understanding, peeling back these layers, understanding root causes. And there's still plenty of places where women get shortchanged. Now, a man might be going, yeah, but that's a woman's problem. The way I like to encourage men to think about it is if you have a woman in your life, whether it's a mother, a sister, a partner, a daughter, colleague, friend, if they are being hampered, it's going to affect you too. So, and the classic case of this is if you're married, you're in a partnership, and there's a man and a woman in the partnership. If a woman can earn less, that affects the whole unit's earning potential.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is detrimental for the man too.
Yes.
And any sense of inequality is that lots of the research shows the more unequal a society, the less happy people are. Now, happy might not be something that everybody strives for. People want fulfillment or contentment, but I think we can agree that a happy society, nominally, is less likely to have revolts and protests and, chaos. So we want people to feel safe and secure. And so closing those gaps is in the interest of everybody. And that's not just for fairness, it's for self-interest.
Yeah.
If you'd like to be happier and in a happier society, help close the gaps. And even if you're a good capitalist, you'll want the gaps closed, because whenever the gaps are there, government tax dollars have to come in and plug those gaps. So even if it's only about the money for you, I don't think many people will be listening to this podcast. It's only about the money, but you never know. There's a vested interest in not having to pay those support payments, because those people can have equitable access to employment and to all the things that they need in the different phases of their lives. So that's why I think it's really important that we continue to recognise this day. And even though it's been 30 years since it started, look, I even probably 5 years ago had like an idealistic, one day we'll be done, we won't need this day. I think not a single society in the world has achieved gender equity yet by all measures. The chances of us ever to be to just stop recognising that this is where we've come from, I think are quite low. Certainly not going to happen probably in the next 100 years. We're going to need a day like this. And for any of the men who are out there going, is there an International Men's Day? Yes, there is. Jump on Google and have a look, because men face challenges too. But I do want to make it clear that it's really important that men don't think of this as a woman's problem, because it's a problem for all of us. And if we solve it, we're all going to be happier.
Yes. And that's exactly it. Like, I see that days like this can divide people when they don't understand what they're about. But equity isn't a pie, right? Like, we're not taking from one gender to prop up the others. We can actually all do better when we've got that equality. So I think that's so important. But I was going to actually, one of my next questions was, what do you say to the people that are like, where's the men's day? And that is actually, for those who aren't aware, that is November, and I've written it down, November 19th. And I'd love to hear your opinion on what you say when people say that. But I'm kind of like, well, if you haven't looked into when your International Men's Day is, you obviously haven't been impacted by some problems enough to go, where do I go to get this support and why is this important? But there is a Men's Day. Maybe we're just better at vocalizing and highlighting the day. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that for the people that aren't aware that there was a Men's Day?
Well, usually when they do it around International Women's Day, I'm like, can you not just give us one day? Like one, like when you look at the gaps, 364 days of the year are men's days.
Yeah, I've had that conversation. Yeah,
without making it about you cynically. That's my first response, is like, pick another day to have your bitch and moan.
Yeah.
So that's the cynical response. But the second one is like, I understand why some men genuinely feel they're hard done by with this. This pendulum swung too far. You've only got to look at some of the leadership stuff that's coming out, particularly from the States at the moment, about, we're too feminine and, who needs inclusion and equity. And I'm like, look, if you want to make more money, you do. By all means, make less money by having non-diverse teams. But, that's your choice if you want to give that up. I think it's important to acknowledge that there are plenty of men who feel like they are being hard done by. Mm-hmm. And that sense of this, it's a fixed pie, right? Like it's this, well, if I give to her, then I lose. I can understand it. And like bluntly, their lives might be really comfortable and they don't want them to change, you know. And I think about my husband. We've got kids and we have shared the primary parent role. There's always one of us who's not nominally full-time working. And we split it 50-50. And it was a real shock for him the first time. He had no idea how much was involved. And he was like, this is hard. Like, yeah, isn't it? You know, like that realization. I think you see people doing that and then you go, well, why would I choose that? If I like being the primary breadwinner and I don't want to do the school pickup, why shouldn't I be able to do that? And like, that's fine. So long as it's an active choice and you're both happy with it and it's good for you as a unit overall. So I think there's often some tension about this fear that they can't say anything, they can't do anything, everyone hates them, they're, you know, like it's unfashionable to be a man, and this sense of loss that they're worried about. From what I have seen, there's always teething issues. There's always an adjustment period. And sometimes it can take a while to settle out different routines or different beliefs. But I've never seen anyone worse off for it. Mm-hmm. I mean, hopefully no one's going to comment, I was worse off for it. Like, there are, on average, it has to be. But I it's certainly for my children been one of the best things ever. They've got they don't always just look for mum, they look for dad too. I can go on a week's work and they're fine. No one misses me, which is a little bit depressing, but they're all okay. And I think the benefit for my kids is going to be enormous. That next generation of seeing that both parents can work, both parents can have that primary carer role. Dads cry and hug too, and they do my husband's probably going to go volunteer in the canteen tomorrow,
Yeah.
It's a choice. Yes. And you don't have to be typecast. And I think that's the thing that most men I speak to that have problems is this: they've been typecast in this role of primary breadwinner. I just have to earn the money and come home, or I do, some, smaller portion of the chores. And unfortunately, they're still doing less chores on average than women are, less of the unpaid work. And that I'm not allowed to show emotion and I can't, I've got to tell my kid to toughen up. And that's historically been true for a lot of them. It's just that maybe the change hasn't caught up and there are families that put pressure on people. So I think if you're curious about it as a man, it's not about us squishing you down. It's about trying to lift everyone up and grow that pie. Let's make it bigger for everybody.
Exactly. And it's totally not about, hating on one. I love the idea that if we're all equal and we're seeing that we can do whatever, then in your family unit, you can work out what that looks like for you. You might meet somebody who has very traditional values and then you have that traditional role, but you have the choice then to build your family around it. And we're not just going with society, with what we've always known, because we didn't know a different way. I think it's so important. I love that. So one thing that I find around this day, but all days of the year really, we just talk about it more around International Women's Day, is there is a confusion around the gender pay gap and equal pay. I find that there's often people think that these are the same thing. So can you talk to me about what really is the difference between those and what you think the important things people should know about both of those issues?
And look, you often hear this when people go, but at my workplace, we don't pay men and women that's different. Like they get paid exactly the same for the same role.
For the same role.
Which is great because that's the legal minimum. You have to do that. That's what equal pay is. And equal pay administered by the Fair Work Commission is about when you do the same work, same job, same hours, you get the same pay. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, you're breaking the law. Okay, so you should never be doing the same role, paying different people different things, unless it's about objective and subjective mix of stuff. There's things like experience that matters, and like that sort of thing, time in role. But effectively, if it's, and particularly unionised workforces where it's or standard, when you're getting paid whatever the official rate is, I've forgotten what the word for it is now. When you got the standard wage, you're not allowed to pay men and women differently. So that is what equal pay is. And yes, in Australia, we have equal pay. Let me tell you, there are places where that people have broken the law. Like, there's a Domino's down the road, young girl working there discovered she was being paid $2 an hour less than the boys on her team, doing the same job. Some people still break these rules. So we still have to hold them to account. But I would say, by and large, that
for the most part.
And sorry, I'm not celebrating that for you because it's the legal minimum.
And it's the minimum from like a human perspective. We shouldn't actually need a law. It should just be standard, right? But we have the law, and that's great. So we've got that sorted. But yeah, people seem to think that is the gender pay gap issue sorted, and it's really not.
It's not, because there's a lot of things that drive this gender pay gap, which is what average earnings are. So it says for an average man and an average woman, what are they earning? And that is driven by a whole lot of other things. That is not as simple as, same work, same pay, because you can't compare some jobs. What we see, though, is that women earn less on average, and that's the gender pay gap. And there are so many root causes for this. And I'll just list a few of them so people understand where this comes from. So one is highly feminized workforces. So think teaching, nursing, get paid less on average per hour. And that's not because what they do is easier. It's because society doesn't value caring roles. We value technical, mathematical, things that look like male skills, right? And those things get paid more highly than caring roles do on average. And so where a lot of women tend to go to work, and certainly nursing and education have been stalwarts for a very long time for women, they get paid less on average per hour. So that's the first thing. Feminized workforces, women dominated areas tend to be paid less on average because society doesn't value caring equally. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it is still most common for women to take career breaks to raise children and even to care for other members of the family. Even if you don't have children, so many people end up caring for an aging relative, or a sick sibling. And it is almost society's expectation that women will do that they'll just like go, oh, well, you take time off work. Now, that decision can be because they earn slightly less sometimes, but often it's because, well, I don't want to wipe my dad's butt.
Yeah, it's the caring nature that we see, women
are better at that. Sorry, not true. But society believes that, and that's how, again, this typecasting has put us. So it's very common for women to take career gaps. And every time you take a career gap, of course, you're not generally earning your own money for that period, but often you're not also earning superannuation. And so obviously legislation has changed that with the paid parenting leave, but not every company has to pay. There are some who will pay superannuation on your parenting leave, but not all.
And sometimes you're off a lot longer than the period that you get that from. And
often there's this discussion, like you've only got to look at the childcare crisis in this country and how hard it is to find a childcare spot. Often the discussion is around, someone has to stay home because if we go and send them to childcare, we're going to have less money overall. We're only going to make $50 a week once we've paid for the childcare. And of course, the way they get sorted is it comes out of the woman's wage instead of coming out of the joint wages.
Yes.
So the analysis on this is pretty clear. So there's been analysis done by Hilda, the Housing and Income Labour Dynamics in Australia survey, and then a group called A-Life. They looked at 5 and 10 years after having a baby. A man's earning potential doesn't change, a woman's drops, and it never recovers in those time periods. And so there's another part of that, which is even if you are a woman who's only come out for a few months or a couple of years and you want to go back to work, you get perceived as being less reliable as an employee. Because when the kids are sick, you're the one who's going to get the phone call. You're the one who's going to do the pickups, right? So there's this, again, cultural expectation that's going to land on women. So these mean that a lot of women, and you know what? Whenever someone says, but that's house choices. No, the analysis has shown if the woman is the primary breadwinner, so they're the one in the household who made the most money, and they have a baby, it's exactly the same drop as if you were the secondary earner. So even if you have the baby, go back to work after 3 months when you just recovered, you can expect a lower earning capacity because of the preconceptions about women re-entering the workforce after they have babies. So, and because a lot of the men are the ones doing the hiring, because they're in a higher proportion of leadership positions. You've only got to look at, the number of CEOs in Australia. It's more common to be named Andrew than to be a woman. And it used to be when I was like a teenager. Those sorts of things have a big impact because these beliefs flow down. And so that happens. And then there's this thing that we've still got a cultural change with women that some people will still abdicate responsibility because it was the man's job to look after the money, or because they have given everything to their kids or sacrificed their lives. So there's some cultural expectations around women that are a bit different from men. And I see it a lot, particularly in divorce circumstances. Women think they need to provide exactly the same lifestyle and the same number of bedrooms, and the man's off there in their 1-bedroom apartment with the kids on a mattress, like that kind of.
I see that a lot. And I think this is the really important thing about this conversation is it's not men hating and these are all the problems. It goes both ways. And why don't we all work towards this fairer system so that we're not both so hard done by on the downside? So we all get the upside, but we also, just take some of the pressure off of these roles that we're given, but we want to question if that actually aligns with where we want to be in our family dynamic.
Yeah, and what works for you. And I think that making these decisions as a unit really helps, but not passing it off as, oh, she does that because she's naturally that way inclined. You're the caring one. You've got to really question. I've seen it with my husband. He's a big guy. He's like, oh, he's a typical, like if you saw him on the street, you might be a little bit, like, oh, geez, he's a bit intimidating. He's like as caring easily as I am. He's as good at everything. And apart from being able to breastfeed, that's the only thing that I could do that he couldn't.
Yeah.
And then if I was pumping breast milk, he'll be fine. He'll get a bottle. So I think these expectations, look, they've really, they weigh heavily on both genders. And the risk you've got if you typecast, particularly later in life, is if the breadwinner gets sick or their career is derailed, suddenly the net earning potential of the household drops dramatically. So when you typecast one way or the other, it means that if the other partner has to step up and do more of the earning to keep the lifestyle going, then suddenly you've really hampered yourself by those decisions that you took because they were easy. You know that saying, hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life? We often take what I think is the easy or the very, short-term decision with these things, and then later you end up paying for it because you didn't think about, hey, we need to keep both partners' work skills and home life up. And you also have this, less connection with the dads that aren't present. So giving them that opportunity. So I always think back to Annabelle Crabb, the journalist from ABC. She wrote this book called The Wife Drought.
I've got that.
Isn't it? It's a great book.
Yeah.
So that caption, why women need wives and why men need lives, that summarizes it. We need to make it easy for men to take on caring roles. We need to stop the stigma for them. My husband took, big career breaks. He took 4 years off at one point. Getting back in the workforce, he gets all the, why'd you take 4 years off? Oh, couldn't your wife look after the kids?
Oh, you like
I don't
it
get that.
strange.
If I want to go back to work, they all just look at that gap and go assume, oh, she must have been looking after the kids. Whereas the men get second guessed or get like, well, why do you have to do that? That cultural stuff that stops men from being able to do the caring roles and particularly the unpaid caring. Like, yes, have some paid caring. That's great. Get the paid parenting leave. Take on some of the unpaid stuff as well, please. So that we can have that sense of fairness, but you also get all the value out of it. Like there's so much that comes from that caring role that you can't get when you are wholly work focused. You just can't. You can't put in the hours, and it is hours that you have to put in to achieve those bonds with your family. So I think there's a lot to be said about enabling men to get out of the workforce and take that and accept that they're going to do some caring, and then getting women's roles paid fairly, making sure that, you're making decisions in a family unit that's going to benefit the total earning potential over 30 years, not just the next few years, looking at childcare costs. And then we do have to challenge leadership. Like if I've got to pick one group of people who's going to make the most change, it's mostly male C-suite. Yeah. They're the ones that have got the biggest chance of making a big difference to this quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. If we think about, well, why is it so important to have International Women's Day? It's so that women can rise, elevate their careers, not have all of these roadblocks, so that they have that earning potential, and men then have more choices as well, like you just said. I think it's really important as well. We often look at women being out of the workforce, and that applies to men as well. But it's not just the time out, the years that you lost that income. It's, yes, the superannuation, but it's also then the skills that you, like if you think about how quickly AI and computer skills and all of that technology stuff, like just those few years out, you're really like stopping those progressions in your career and your earning potentials. So it's the physical money, but it's also the compounding impact of that, and then the skill set that then puts you in career rises. And this is where I get really worried when people say, oh, it's not worth me going back to work because of daycare, and they do take it out of the woman, like the woman's, like if they've got a budget, right? And they're just like, oh, well, we're comparing it against your wage, what you're going to add back in. But there's so many different things that don't have a monetary value. There is the super, which is monetary, but there's the skill set, the confidence, just rising with companies and workforces. And it's pretty scary that that's not taken into account.
And it's hard to price, but it's also
It
that
is.
network, you know? So many promotions, the further you go up, aren't advertised. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's about if you're front of mind. And how can you be front of mind if you're not connected? So
Yeah.
that loss of networking, I think, is a massive thing. A lot of women I've seen have had to start back again after, you know, a 5 to 7 year break, which is normal for a lot of families because they'll stay out until the kids start full-time school. And once that happens, they go back in and suddenly they have to take a job that's 2 or 3 pay grades lower and less responsibility. And so it is this, you've been forgotten about.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, it's fine to take those breaks, but I really hope that women who do find a way to stay connected, whether through professional organizations or occasional catch-ups with ex-colleagues or bosses, you know, it could be once every 4 or 5, 6 months. It doesn't have to be frequent, but just keeping front of mind, it can overcome some of that. And I totally agree with this. You know, the money doesn't come out of the woman's wage. It comes out of the joint wage because effectively the woman staying home allows the man to go out and do these things.
Enabling.
And reverse, in my case, you know, it was my husband staying home that allowed me to be able to go out and keep MoneySchool going.
That was my experience as well. At one point in my career, it made more sense for my husband to stay home and do that. And then I would do the occasional school pickup and like didn't know any of the school mums, and I'd just be there like on the phone in a meeting or whatever, grabbing the kids, and where he would go and he's chatting and having coffee, and I was like, oh, this is so, and it felt so uncomfortable. I loved it, but it felt so uncomfortable because it's not just like normal society. So it feels like a failure. But if we actually all rise and see that as equal and it doesn't matter, it's not going to feel so hard on the people that are trying to challenge the norm. But the other thing is there's self-identity. So yes, women staying in contact, like if they're going to take on those carer roles, staying in contact for all of those things, but it's a real loss of self, like your identity. Like I remember when I was going to have my kids, before I got pregnant, you know, when you're the perfect parent before you have kids, I was one of them. I was like, at the minute that I have babies, I don't want to work again until they're at school. I want to be in the financial position not to work. And that was really important to me until I had my children. And then within about 3 months, I was like, wow, I need to go back to work. Even if it's 1 day a week, I need something for me. And I just want people to have choice to stay at home forever because that lights them up, or be working parents or whatever it is. But I was shocked because I thought one way would work for me, and I really needed that balance. And it was a big eye opener. So having choice is so important.
Exactly. Yeah. And you have to test. You don't know. You don't know what you're going to be like. Like you said, you know, when I took my first break to have my first child, everyone was like, oh, you'll be back at work within 6 months. There's no way you can sit at home. 18 months later, they're like, are you coming back? I'm like, no, I actually really like this. I was having a really good time. It turns out I'm very good at resting. I mean, not that there's a lot of rest with an 18-month-old, but I'm okay with with a messy house and reading a book. So I was okay. And it was only like I was starting to get a little bit bored at that point. But you don't know until you don't know it. And you're exactly right about this option of choice. So for me, that's why money has always been about being time rich. And it's not that you get to sit on your butt and do nothing. It's that you choose how you spend your time. You get to pick and you can change it up. And it's been so good to be able, in our family, to tag team on these things. Because like you, I can't do it for long. You know, I did it for 14 months before we moved back to Perth. We went on a big holiday to Europe for 4 months. It was great. But for the 14 months before that, my husband had gone back to full-time work after 4 years, and I had to take it back on again. And it is intense. And trying to do any work around it was really hard, especially at the beginning, trying to adjust to, and oh no, I've only got these 5 hours in the day where I can do appointments. You know, that kind of stuff. It was much more complicated. And I think having those multiple experiences makes us much more sympathetic to our partners as well. I'm pretty sure that's part of why Adam and I are not yet divorced. I hope never, but you know, because neither one of us can be like, oh, but it's not a big deal. Like we both go, oh no, I remember what that was like. And both have their challenges, you know, those days when you don't want to go to work and you have to. Yeah. You know, it's both people sacrifice something. But going through that period of knowing what it's like and being willing to experiment and to let each other try, I think is really important part of the life experience. And imagine missing the chance to do that when your kids are young. You know, like so many people I talk to are like, oh, yeah, my kids are like late teens or 20s and they're gone now. I'm like, well, you can still be time rich and they probably still want to go on holidays with you if you're paying. So
If you're paying, yeah. Yeah.
so, you know, like
exactly
you
right.
can still do it. But it is one of those things when they're young, that ability to tag team like that's really beneficial. And I hope my kids will look back and appreciate it. I mean, they're little experiments, aren't they? I don't know. They might end up in therapy over it. But anyway, we'll hope not.
They've got to be in therapy for something. I'm sure. But yeah, I think the key here is like financial independence gives us choice, and whatever it looks like in your household, if you're a single, if you've got kids, if you're an adult couple without kids, whatever it looks like, you want to make sure that you're framing your lifestyle and making decisions that work best for your family. And the way that we can make sure that every household and person has choice is to try and sort out the equalities in other things that take those choices away. Yeah. So for those who are listening that are keen to make an impact, you know, they want to be part of the solution, whether they're a man or woman, whoever, what do you think, like some of the actions or things that people should be thinking about when they want to be part of a solution here and part of the growth that we need?
So I think particularly there's someone on here who's listening that's gone, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, or this is new to me. Curiosity is the best solution with all of this stuff. No one's expected to have the answers straight away. It's okay to be learning and it's okay to be experimenting. I think where people often get put off is if they expect someone to teach them for free. You know, like it'd be like me going to an Aboriginal elder and be like, can you explain like colonization to me? Like, sure, if you pay me.
Yeah. Like, I don't have time to teach everybody.
Exactly. So you've got to have this realistic expectation about what's fair to expect. Like, because often people will say, but you should be educating, Lacey. Don't just wrap people over the knuckles. And I'll be like, there's enough information out there now that those who are curious can go and find it. They don't need to plead ignorance all the time. Like, so first of all, if you're curious, go get online, do some research. There's amazing information out there. Now, I did also just use the word research. What I should say is do some reading, listening, watching. Research should probably be a protected term. Because it's, you know, like research means you've looked for things, you know, taken out bias, you've accounted for all different variables, all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Scrolling on your phone isn't research.
Exactly. Do some reading, but be curious. And I think feel free to listen to lots of voices because you'll find the ones that connect with you. So that's the first thing for people who are like, oh, I hadn't really thought about this. There's different advice for different kind of roles, I think, that's worth considering. So if you are a male leader, so you are running a company or you're in the C-suite or the managing team for that company, you have the biggest chance to change this quickly. You are like our superheroes in this particular journey because men who are running companies have the quickest way into fixing the gender pay gap for their staff. So at the moment, you might be aware, people might be aware, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, WGEA, releases data. This is the second year they've done it. We call it, Data Christmas, for employers. So employers with more than 100 employees have to do a gender pay gap analysis. And I think there was, last count, 7,000 or 9,000 employers. You can go in and see their gender pay gaps. There's a lot of companies smaller than that, like 1 million people in small businesses. Like there's a lot of companies where these gaps probably still exist, but they don't get reported for the data. So I think for the ones that have got the data, it's pretty straightforward. If you've got a gap, you can do the work. And sometimes you're going to go backwards as you're doing it because you've got to do things like fill pipelines and find women to promote if you haven't had many of them, and there's recruitment and turnover. You don't have to do it tomorrow. Yeah. But you have to start right now. If you're in a smaller business, doing your own audit would be great. Go and find out. Because often we think there's no problem, but then when we look at the numbers, we go, oh, I hadn't even noticed. A few pay reviews go by and suddenly gaps widen. Yeah. They might have been on the same pay when they started. I think that
I like that because while it's not mandated that they have to report, you have a responsibility to be like a leader and like have a great workplace. So while it's not mandated for these smaller companies, you can still do it yourself and you can still apply the same principles.
Exactly. And as much as possible, and like small businesses, they are different from big businesses. That's why they're not forced to report. You don't have the overhead. You don't have the spare people. Like every person you pay is a person, and you can't have a vacant seat just because people, have to take breaks. So, totally understand that. But as far as possible, you can make your workplace flexible, family friendly, And I'd really encourage all men in workplaces not to take the mickey out of any man who does the caring roles. So none of this like, oh, what do you have to do this for? Like, oh, can't your wife do the pickup? Or, I've had a friend who, he applied for the paid parenting leave that he was entitled to. And his boss was like, don't you tell any of the other men in this team. I don't want any of them taking it either. That sort of stuff is the cultural barrier that makes it harder for men to do those things. So if you're a man and you go, I would never do that, please keep your ear out for it. And if you hear it happening, say something on the spot. Do it in a way that works for you, but intervene, because it has to come from the people in positions of power, the men, not the women. Women can't fix most of this. Most of it is actually beyond our control, or we actually need willing partners to fix it with. So as much as like everyone's got something to do, most of the change will happen quickly with men. So that's why I always talk about male leaders first. And then, of course, if you're a partner and you're part of a household, do more of the unpaid caring stuff. And look, everyone goes, oh, but I'll do the paid parenting leave. That's fine. Yeah, that's nice. Great. Take the paid parenting leave. But also please do the washing, the ironing, the cooking, the cleaning, like share that stuff and actively work it out. And don't just divide it by inside, outside chores like a default. Though that said, in my household, like my job is the garden.
Yeah. But this is it. It's to have these conversations and decide what works for you. Like I say this about finance as well. It's okay for it to default to one person for the everyday stuff. Like you can outsource the execution, but not the understanding. Both need to be aware and be making an active decision that, yeah, we're both all over this, but you actually do the day-to-day. And that's like anything, the gardens or whatever. It's like, well, I know how to do them and I could do them, but you do that. Like just have the conversation and make informed choices. And if it's not working, address it. It's like any aspect of our lives. But I think, everybody just needs to understand that this isn't a us against them kind of problem. It's if we can sort this, we're all going to be better off.
Oh, absolutely. It'll grow the economy and our ETFs will all do better. Let's do it. And I think that's the other thing for men, I think, to whenever you're having those big planning choices about who's going to take a career break for children and for care, just make those decisions from the point of view of a 30-year earning potential, not from the next 2 years. Think about what is the impact on your family as a whole if one of you has earning potential and one has none. It's a massive risk. So make decisions with that view. And then the other thing, I'm pretty. I used to be very soft on this, but now I'm getting harder every year. It is better, I think, in most cases, for everyone in a partnership to have some money to which they're the only signatory. By that, like I know it's very popular. Some people love to join everything. It's fine. If it works for you, it's active and there's no hint of abuse. I can tell you almost every abused woman, and remember 1 in 6 women will experience financial abuse in this country. 1 in 6. It's a lot of them. That's a couple of million. All of them, when they first started, didn't realize it was going to be abusive. They had good intentions, and sometimes something changed. Someone got injured, they got sick, they, I don't know, had a midlife crisis. Something can happen. The reason women go back to those relationships, and it is women in the majority that this happens to, is because they don't have access to their own money. So that's the pointy end. I think everybody should have some of their own money, both partners in a relationship. And I call it staying money. Other people call it running away money. It's staying money, as in I choose to stay. I could leave if I want to. But the other part of that is it can give each partner a little bit of independence. So it's always nice, like, if my husband, he's into motorbikes, if he wants to go parts for his motorbikes, he likes having it in an account where there's no, you can achieve this with joint accounts by having limits, but it's guilt-free.
It's guilt-free money, no questions asked. So I do money coaching where I talk to people about managing their money, and the amount of couples that I see that when we talk about how they're managing everything and they've got everything joint, I say, what about having an account each, which is your discretionary money, no questions asked. The relief on both their faces that, can we do that? Can we be married and have our own money? And I'm like, yeah, you can share everything else. Like you can share nothing. You can work towards the same goals and not join like your finances. But if they're already intertwined, you can still have a little account that allowance, for the lack of a better word, that you're guilt-free. You do whatever you want with that, and it's not family money. And just the relief like that I see over them from both sides. Nobody has ever been like, oh, well, I think that a marriage ruiner kind of thing. Like it's just like an eye opener that are we allowed to do that?
That would be so rewarding. But there is like like the Barefoot Investor, when his first book came out, there's a line in it which is all money should be joint in marriage. One line, right? And I had like 22-year-olds coming to me going, look, I've moved in with my boyfriend, so all money's joint now. Like, no! Those cultural norms, it's awesome that you're getting people that are responding well. But if you're having an aversion to your partner having their own money, you've got a control issue. The only reason we want people to not have access to money is effectively to control them. We see it a lot with kids. I don't want to give them an allowance because I don't think they'll make good decisions with it. So you want to control the decisions.
So there's an underlying, there's an underlying thing there. And that happens in couples because we have different money stories and brought up differently. So if you're having those feelings, it's not about squashing them and overriding them. It's about working through them and working out, well, how do we actually change these into positive habits? We all have things. Yeah, and we all have traits that serve us, hinder, help us. Like it's about identifying them and making sure that we're growing and trying to improve ourselves and our the relationships around us.
Exactly. And finding a way that is an active choice. Like we've both said it a lot. It's this whole find something that works for you, but don't just take a default. And so the other part of that, of course, is for women. You have to be actively involved in your money. Even if you're not doing the earning, even if you don't do anything with it, you can't abdicate responsibility. And so I get where the Barefoot Investor was trying to come from with that line. He was seeing women who were like, oh, it's all my husband's job and I don't do anything. He was trying to get them involved. I think saying it's all joint is too far. You have to accept that for safety reasons alone, but also for all those other reasons you've just outlined that are the much more common ones, it's worth having some separate money. But it just becomes this cultural expectation that we grew up with. And so we have to be willing to shake that off. And women are good with money. They are good at investing. And I think that's the other thing. We often talk about women are good at saving, men are good at investing. Actually, the data shows that women are better at investing on average.
Yeah. We have these stereotypes. Yeah. If the woman in the house, just cut the budget, you do this, you get the grocery list down, expenses down. Like we get these roles on how we contribute financially.
Yeah, exactly. So be willing, I think, to challenge that. And I think the big thing that upsets me for women, I see it today because social media is so prevalent, is how much extra money they spend on how they look from a very, very young age. That's almost like a handicap. Like we almost got to lose something covered. We don't get a pink discount. We actually get pinked and shrinked on our money. Our living costs are at least as high. Fight back, ladies. Don't succumb to this pressure to spend money, exorbitant amounts of money on how you look. Think about future you.
And the values, like what's actually important to you. Because what worries me about that is when I see, girls from a young age having the fake nails and the facials and stuff, I'm like, that's fine while you've got a disposable income. But what if when life gets really tough, you've now got a home loan, you're off work for a baby, whatever, expenses change. And if you've tied so much of your possibly, your self-worth, and that's always been part, it's going to be really hard to cut when necessities change. And so I think it's really important that we're always, from as early as possible, looking at what values we have and what actually aligns with what we want to be spending our money on and questioning norms. And it goes with everything, travel, everything you're doing, the car you drive, the house you live in. It's not just about these discretionary, I guess, beauty things that we talk about.
Exactly. I usually say to people, look, if you get lots of value out of it, just pick one or two. Don't do all the things. Don't have the fancy car and the fancy house and all the beauty stuff and the amazing holidays. You can't really do all of that unless you've got a huge disposable income. Pick a couple and just do a couple of the ones that really make you feel good and not because society has told you should feel good for it. I feel like we get tricked into a lot of unnecessary spending that doesn't add as much value as we think we will. So I guess that's probably, I don't know if I'm going to come across as being condescending with that, but I hope you all are going to resist the commercialization. That's what I think.
Yeah, and it's fine to do those things. I have an addiction to luxury handbags, designer handbags, but I forfeit in other areas. I rarely clothes shop. I'm not a shoe person, and I invest and I do all of these other things. So I guilt-free buy those handbags. But I know other people that are like, I can't believe you waste your money on handbags.
Yeah, but you love it, right? You get joy. So that's the thing. You found the
other
thing
stuff.
that gives you joy. So if it's giving you high amounts of value, whether that's joy or it's meeting a need, then great, But like you say, you've picked your one. You're not doing the shoes and the other stuff as well. So I think that sometimes it's hard for us to pick the one thing or the one or two things.
Especially with social media, when we're bombarded with all of the things. And that goes with the beautiful house. And it's even with investment strategies. Like people are like, oh, but my friends are buying investment properties. Oh, should I be doing that? Oh, I was going to invest in shares. Like we just had a question on the podcast today. All my friends are doing this, but I want to invest in my business. It's not just coming to discretionary kind of spending. It's anything. Like there's so many choices, and we need to really make sure that we're making decisions that align with what feels right for us and the life that we're trying to build.
Absolutely. And sometimes it takes some time and experimentation. Sometimes you need to talk to someone, who's got the expertise to offer you. Don't be afraid to ask, and don't be afraid to be a bit vulnerable about it. That it used to be more taboo to talk about money than your sex life, but it isn't anymore. We're allowed to talk.
Yeah, well, anything goes these days. So for those who are listening that want to get their money sorted, that want to kind of be having these conversations, but just the financial literacy piece, which is what, you're all about. Where can they connect with you? What are some great kind of avenues to stay in touch with the things that you're doing?
So MoneySchool is the name of my business. So you can head to moneyschool.net.au and you'll find all the resources, and including some links to some blogs. So I think a lot of people get heaps of value out of. I've got some long form blogs that analyze some questions, things like, should I put my money in my redraw or my offset, some like little ones, and then some big life questions. So feel free to have a look at those blogs. I've got a book called Money School, came out 5 years ago. I can hardly believe it, with Penguin. And so that's available at all bookstores. You can buy it online or jump into, I still see it on shelves, which is amazing. But that's a pretty good dive in and pick what you like kind of way. You can self-serve what you're interested in, but it talks about this idea of being financially independent and time rich, and then the ways to get there.
Yeah, and that very much suits like our community are very much like DIYers, financial independence, really like self-starters that they want to learn and get as much information as they can. So yes, Lacey's Money School is a great resource for that stuff, because it's hard to find good resources that are trustworthy and have that kind of research element, all of that kind of stuff with it. So that's a great place to go. I'll put the link in the show notes for where you can reach Money School and look at stuff for Lacey as well. But thank you so much for being on the Australian Finance Podcast. It wasn't the first time. I'm sure it won't be the last. But thank you for talking us through all things International Women's Day. I'm hoping that everybody got some good insights into it and inspired to see, why it's so important and why we still need it today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Gemma. Really enjoyed it.
No worries. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.